Well, hello and welcome to today's episode of Breaking the Taboo. And on today's episode, we're going to be looking at a subject we haven't talked about before, but I've had so many comments in from listeners asking me for more information about this. And that, of course, is extreme morning sickness, also known as Hyperemesis Gravidarum. And I'm delighted to have with me today two guests to talk about this with you. And the first is Charlotte Howden, who is the Chief Executive of the Pregnancy Sickness Support Charity. And we'll hear a bit more about what the charity does later in the show. But I'm also delighted that their ambassador, Afshan Azad, is with us. And you probably recognise her as a British actress and public figure best known for her role as Padma Patil in the Harry Potter film series. But what you might not know is that outside of her career in the entertainment industry, Afshan is also a proud mum to two girls, and she's an ambassador for the charity after going through a similar experience herself. And I hope today, ladies, that we're going to break the silence by speaking about severe morning sickness and allow more women to be seen, heard and supported. So thank you for joining us on today's episode. And Charlotte, perhaps if I could start with you first. This is not everyday morning sickness that a huge proportion of the British public will have as new pregnant mums. This is a very different medical condition. So could you just explain to us what HG is and where does it kind of sit on the spectrum of pregnancy sickness?
Yeah, of course. And yeah, that's absolutely right. So the majority of women will suffer with some form of pregnancy sickness. It's actually as high as about 80%. And that pregnancy sickness we would describe as being usual and normal. It's probably still not very nice. I've not experienced usual pregnancy sickness. Unfortunately, I got the HG version. It's manageable, it's usual, and it's normal, and it's nothing to be concerned about. On the complete other end of that spectrum is this condition, Hyperemesis Gravidarum, which is more easily referred to as HG, and that affects around 3% of pregnancies every year. So to put that in context, in the UK, that's around 30,000 pregnancies. So this isn't a small number of people that we're talking about here. This is quite a large group of women every year who are getting this condition. So to really characterize HG, it's severe nausea and or vomiting in pregnancy that occurs before 16 weeks gestation, and it has a very limiting effect, quite severe effect on your daily ability to go about your life, and of course your ability to eat and drink normally. I think, interestingly enough, because I don't think this is very well known, it's the leading cause of hospitalization in the first trimester, which is a huge thing, I think, because I think, early pregnancy, obviously there's lots of awful complications that can happen. But with HG, this is the leading cause of hospitalization. So having to go into hospital to get care and treatment. From personal experience, and Afshan will definitely be talking about this today, it's hellish. It doesn't end after the first trimester. For most women, it should end within the second trimester. So that might be at the start, maybe closer to the end. But really, sadly, 1 in 5 will have those symptoms of the severe nausea and vomiting for the entire pregnancy. So that's 9 months of being sick and or feeling sick at the same time.
Wow. Well, I mean, that really puts it in context. And I think I first came across it when the Duchess of Cambridge suffered from it and, of course, wasn't able to fulfill her duties. So yeah, it really is a very extreme form. And in fact, I keep running into people now who've had it. Even members of my own family have had to be hospitalised on a drip as a result of the condition. And it really impacts on your day-to-day living. So Afshan, would you mind sharing what happened to you? And I believe you had hyperemesis twice with both of your children.
I did.
But what was the kind of symptoms that you started to display when you realised you had it?
I did, yes. I had it with both pregnancies, unfortunately, which I didn't realise that I would have as well. Nobody told me I'd have it twice. First time round, again, like Charlotte said, it was before I even hit 4 weeks pregnant. I was throwing up, and as I've read in the books and seen in the films, and morning sickness is a thing, so I thought, okay, I'm throwing up, I'm pregnant, I'm throwing up. And then it got severely worse, and what I mean by worse, I mean more frequent. It came to a point where I couldn't eat anything, I couldn't smell. Certain smells would trigger me. There were certain triggers that would constantly just make me feel nauseous, and then I would throw up. And when it got to about 20 times a day, 30 times a day, more, and then I was like, this surely isn't normal. But everyone was kind of passing me by. It was sickness, it's morning sickness. I said, it's not morning sickness because this is happening all day and night. So that term morning sickness flew out the window, and I said, no, this is something more. When it happened, and it didn't stop, that's the problem. So much so that I couldn't lift my head out of the bed to go. I had a bucket by the side of me that I was just constantly vomiting in. Couldn't eat anything. Water, people were like, drink. I couldn't drink anything. And then I resorted to go to the hospital because I needed help.
Wow. I mean, this is a really extreme. So I think if anyone's listening to the show today, this is not normal morning sickness. I think the first thing to say is you need to seek medical help.
You know when it's not morning sickness. You know when it's a lot worse than that. It's nowhere near it, to be honest. It's debilitating and horrendous when you're going through it.
And Afshan, I'm interested to know, when you were a pregnant mum, is it something that you'd heard of or knew much about, or was it just a real shock?
Not really. Like yourself, I've heard Kate Middleton went through it, but it's something that I never thought I would go through. You see it and you hear it. But no, I don't even think I ever got a diagnosis the first time around where somebody actually mentioned the words hyperemesis. They just said, you've got extreme morning sickness. I don't think I heard about hyperemesis once I researched it myself. But yeah, I again was put on a drip, and I was like, what is happening to me? I was so scared. I didn't know what it was, so I was so scared, and all these tablets that they were giving me, nothing worked. The hospital just kind of was like, go home with these anti-sickness tablets, and yeah, nothing worked. I was scared for my unborn baby. I was scared for myself. My husband had never seen me in this state, so he was like, what is going on? So yeah, it's not something that I initially heard of, no, and I just got told it was extreme morning sickness, which is kind of an understatement, to be honest.
Absolutely. And Charlotte, presumably that's something you hear from mums all the time. And partly the reason I wanted to do today's podcast was to raise awareness, to say it is a medical condition, you should seek help. So if anyone's listening to the show today, what symptoms should they be looking out for to then seek medical attention?
I really want to kind of drive home this point that vomiting, obviously 20, 30, 40, 50 times a day is absolutely not usual, and you are going to need to seek help really, really quickly and urgently. But also there are a lot of sufferers that just have persistent, consistent nausea, and that is just as debilitating. So you might not be being physically sick, but to constantly feel sick is just as bad. And you must also go and ask for help, because the most important thing here is that not being able to eat, not having any nutrition intake in your first trimester, and not being able to consume water or any kind of liquid is very, very urgently, you need urgent attention. That's not normal, and it can have really long-lasting impacts on mum. There is more research coming out in terms of impact on baby. I don't want to scare anyone. At the moment, it seems that, if you can get that care and treatment quickly enough, which is really the first point to make, quick access to timely, effective treatment and care. But just logically thinking, as any human being, not eating and drinking is not normal, and you need to get help. There are other symptoms as well, Theo. So a lesser kind of known one is something called tylism, which is excessive saliva production. And this is actually probably one of the worst side effects of HG, because, people know what we're talking about today, but obviously you swallow your saliva. And if swallowing triggers vomiting, it becomes a really vicious cycle for those with excessive saliva production, because every time you swallow, you are then sick. So that is, again, a hellish experience to go through. Things like being dizzy, fatigued, again, really obvious side effects of not eating and drinking. One that is really, really important, and this has been highlighted in recent Embrace reports, is blood clots. So we do know in pregnancy that later on, so usually in the third trimester, where women might become a bit more immobile because obviously they're later in pregnancy, carrying nearly to full-term baby inside them. But actually, when you have HG, you are very likely to be bedbound, which means you are immobile, and that means you are not moving, you're not walking around, the blood flow isn't going around as usual. So That's really important. So if you are bedbound, you know that you're not being able to move around the house, get out of the house, even walk up and down the stairs, please go and speak to someone about that, because there is treatment that can help with that, because blood clots, they end up unfortunately killing women in the first trimester, pregnant women in the first trimester. So that's another really serious point that I want to drive home. Please just go and speak to your GP, midwife, and get that help.
That's so important. And Afshan, you had 2 children, so presumably the first time round it was bad, but second time round you actually had a toddler to look after as well. So what was that like, trying to deal with it in that family dynamic?
Oh gosh, so many people, told me the first time round you don't necessarily get hyperemesis with the second pregnancy, as Charlotte's smiling there, because it's only when I spoke to Charlotte that I heard the percentages and the numbers of how it is more often that you probably will get it. No one told me that. But when I fell pregnant the second time round, it was a whole different kind of fish. I had a 2-year-old toddler to manage, who was going to nursery, preschool. My husband, bless him, had to take annual leave because I just couldn't be the mum that I have been. I was bedbound, like Charlotte said. I couldn't lift my head. I couldn't physically actually come downstairs. I tried. There was some sort of smell downstairs. I don't know what it was. Nobody else could smell it, but it would trigger me every time I'd come downstairs. So I just had to stay upstairs in my bedroom, window open, in the middle of winter. And my daughter constantly crying that her mum wasn't picking up from nursery. I wasn't feeding her. I couldn't even get her dressed in the morning. I would just about kind of, when she comes in, just kind of brush her hair, because my poor husband, he's not very good with girls' hair. So I could just about do her hair. But other than that, I would hear them play downstairs and, just be crying upstairs. I couldn't be with my daughter. And every time she'd come near me, again, there was a smell that she had that would just make me vomit. She actually announced to her school that mummy was vomiting at home, so that her teachers knew that that I was pregnant, due to her retching and telling her teachers that all mummy does is retch at home. But yeah, I couldn't be the mum that I have always been, especially second time round. I find it a lot harder, and I found my hyperemesis, I don't know whether this is a thing, Charlotte, but got worse. If it could get worse, it was worse, or I don't know whether it was because I was more aware, but I found myself vomiting double the amount, losing a lot more weight the second time round, and just a lot more, I think depressed is a word, a lot more, a lot more depressed the second time round, because I had these other factors.
Well, Afshan, thank you very much for sharing your experience. And I think it's so important that we do talk about this, and that mums know they're not alone who are having a similar experience. So Charlotte, if a mum is listening to the show thinking, crikey, I do have very similar symptoms, what should be their first point of call? Who should they get in contact with?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, look, this is a medical condition, so you need to go and see a healthcare professional. This typically happens in early pregnancy, so that's going to very likely be a GP. My biggest advice would be, when you make that appointment, if you can, jot down what you've been experiencing. They're likely to ask you, when you walk in and say, I've not been able to keep anything down. You might be met with, well, no, come on, how much have you been able to drink? So if you've got some information where you can actually say, literally nothing, or I've had this amount of water, or whatever it might be, and what food you've been able to have. So yeah, go and speak to a GP, ask them to assess you for Hyperemesis Gravidarum, explain to them, which is really important, how it is limiting your ability to go about your life normally. So as Afshan's already said, it is not normal to not be able to do anything but brush your daughter's hair. It's not normal to not be able to dress them, go downstairs, etc., etc. So explain all of those things. And it is a personal decision, but obviously with a medical condition like this, the biggest focus that we need to look at is making mum better, so that she can start to be able to eat and drink again. Okay, we're not talking 3-course dinners, that's going to be very unlikely, but we need to get some nutrition into mum. And one of the ways to do that is to take anti-sickness medication, which is safe to take in pregnancy. which will help alleviate some of those symptoms. And the other thing we can do, of course, again, Afshan's talked about going into hospital. It's not nice going into hospital, but to have the ability to be rehydrated via a drip is really, really crucial. It really sets you again, gives you that kind of reset to be able to go, okay, I'm rehydrated again. I've got this medication that hopefully should be able to help me. And now I can go back to hopefully being able to eat and drink. And the last thing I would say, that if you find that the medication isn't working for you, there is a plethora of medications out there.
Yeah.
And we talk about a kind of ladder effect. So you start here, that doesn't work. You have to go back and ask for a different medication and go up the ladder until hopefully they find a combination of medications that work for you.
And I think you're making an important point there, Charlotte, about mums advocating for themselves and not being afraid to ask. And something we're doing on Breaking the Taboo is to hopefully break that shame and stigma about talking about these things and saying, please do ask for help. And Afshan, I was struck that you said you didn't know much about it before you had it. So did you get help from your local GP or doctor? Like, who was the first person that you contacted and what did they provide?
I actually didn't realise, naively of me, the first time, my first pregnancy, to even ring the GP. The first person I rang for myself was actually my midwife, to say, I'm throwing up like this. Is this normal? And she, I hate to say, she told me, yes, it's normal. And it was, it was just extreme sickness. Some people have it like this, some people don't. I was one of the unlucky ones. And it got to a point where my husband actually rang A&E and said, my wife is like this, I'm bringing her in, kind of thing. And we actually went into A&E and I waited there for 10 hours, I think, in A&E, and I just had a bucket and I would throw up in the waiting room. I actually remember it so vividly. When I finally got seen by the doctor at A&E, they said, it's just sickness. It's just sickness. And when I advocated for myself then, and I said, no, this isn't sickness, I've longed it out. I've waited a long time to come to A&E. I think I waited at least a few weeks at home. And I said to my husband, maybe it'll go, until he saw me and I was on the floor and I was begging for help. And I was like, this isn't normal. I can't lift my head. I can't. And he was like, have some water. He was trying, bless him. But I was like, I can't drink water, until the point he was like, no, you need to go to A&E. This isn't normal. I never rang my GP, which, I should have probably done. But I went into A&E. And when I told the doctor, I haven't drank or eaten in 3 weeks. And it was no exaggeration either. I mean, I couldn't even figure out something that I could stomach at that point. And he kind of looked at me and was like, 3 weeks? I was like, honestly, I've lost so much weight. And that's when they were like, right, okay, let's put you on a drip. And when he saw the fact that my husband said, look, this is her third sick bucket sat here. Like, it's full and we keep emptying it. And then they took me seriously and then they put me on a drip and they then gave me anti-sickness tablets, which didn't work. And I found myself back in hospital every single week because the drip was the only thing that made me feel half alive. And I think it had like an expiration in me of 3 days. It didn't last very long, but it gave me that 3 days of being, okay, I can do something. And I think everyone finds their vice, and my vice of eating was these ice lollies, fruit pastel ice lollies, which I would just suck it on and eat. And that was my water intake, my sugar intake. And I kid you not, my freezer was full of them ice lollies, and that's the only thing I can have. And if one more person told me to suck on a ginger sweet or have a ginger, so anything ginger, I was going to blow my mind because nothing worked, nothing.
Yeah, and actually I've heard that before about the ice lollies, that sometimes sucking on something is the only thing that works. Yeah. And presumably that had a huge impact on you doing your day-to-day life, like going out and about, going to work, if you're having to be admitted to hospital multiple times. 100%. So what did you do in that scenario?
I cancelled everything. I didn't have a life, Theo. I wasn't a mum. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't myself. I had job opportunities coming and I was cancelling everything. I was in bed on my phone, emailing, saying, I'm sorry. And at that point, I hadn't told anyone I was pregnant. So I'd have to, like, for example, that all got stripped off me. Like, the whole reveal of being pregnant, with my family as well. Like, I wanted to tell them in a certain way and I couldn't because they knew because I was sick and I needed my mom. But work-wise, I couldn't do anything. I had to cancel everything. And like I said, I hadn't told anyone I was pregnant at that time. Normally women wait until I don't know how many weeks, 20 weeks, something like that, 16 weeks to tell people I was pregnant. I couldn't, I didn't have that. So I had to tell people, I'm sorry, I'm really I'm pregnant. I'm really unwell. And I didn't work. I had to cancel everything. And that had a massive, massive impact on my mental health, both time rounds, both pregnancies, but especially second time round. Obviously, I couldn't go to my daughter's plays, her sports day. I'll never forget missing that. And it's stuff like that that made me feel like the worst mum in the world and also the worst wife in the world, which a lot of people probably feel and don't speak about. Both times round, I felt like the worst wife. I couldn't sleep in the same bed as my husband because his smell, his shampoo, his aftershave, poor man couldn't wear any aftershave because it would trigger me. And eventually I was like, just go into the spare room because this isn't going to work. And so, I had to cancel everything.
Yeah, God, that's so difficult. And also for someone like yourself who's a public figure, I mean, you're in one of the biggest film franchises of all time. I mean, I think you're in 5 Harry Potter films since Goblet of Fire. So, people want to know what you're up to. And if they don't see you out and about on social media, they want to know what's wrong. So presumably that was also incredibly difficult, back to your point about telling people.
Yeah, well, the thing is, this is what happened. Because I wasn't online, there was nothing I could post. People were commenting on previous posts saying, she's pregnant, where is she gone? And that's what they jumped to straight away. It's really strange. Like, if you're not online for a certain amount of time, they just presume you're pregnant. And so, there was a huge gap before I felt like I was human enough to post something. And that something had to be a pregnancy announcement because there was nothing I could actually say. And once I'd announced I was pregnant, I found it a lot easier to manage my life so that people just knew, okay, she's unwell or she's this, that, whatever. But they didn't realize this, how big it was. And especially the first time round, as you said, I was embarrassed. I was really ashamed that I even had it. I never told anyone the first pregnancy that I had hyperemesis. Number one, I thought people wouldn't understand because the few people that I did say was like, oh yeah, I had morning sickness too. There's always an answer like that. And there's nothing I could say that I was like, it's not morning sickness. But there wasn't anything around, like in telling people what it was like.
And you mentioned it had an impact on your mental health, and that's something I'd love to talk about if you're happy to share it, Afshan, because I think we don't talk about that enough.
No.
And I think so many mums who've been through a really difficult pregnancy or post-birth as well have had a really difficult time, and it's okay to seek help. So what first happened for you, and where did you find help?
So the first pregnancy, I didn't have any help. The only help I had was my immediate family who would tell me, you've got this, you'll get to the end. Second time round, I knew there was help, some sort of help out there, only because my midwife put me in touch with a counsellor who gave me therapy every week. I would speak to her. But it's only when and I know a lot of mums might have felt the same. The second time round, I actually had a conversation with my husband about the fact how I couldn't do this anymore. And I had the talk with him where because I was alone for most of the day, my intrusive thoughts would get to me. And I did actually think, I can't have this baby. And I made the decision to call my husband and actually sit him down. And I remember the day when I was like, I can't have this baby. I can't do this. I can't. And I was begging him to please let me get rid of this baby. And when I said that, he was like, no, like, if this is what you actually do want, then okay. But he knew that it was coming from something within. I wasn't mentally stable at that time. And he knows me just as much as, each other. So that's when, I said, okay, well, then I need help. Like, I was begging him for help. And that's when we reached out to our midwife and she got me in touch with the NHS counsellor. And she helped me so much. And I wish I had her the first time round. I wish I even knew it was available. I wish I knew that there was a charity like Charlotte, out there that I could message or help. All I wanted was someone to tell me that I wasn't alone, that there were other people out there that had hyperemesis too. And this counsellor, would speak to me every week and just check in with me. That's all I needed, someone just to check in with me. I wasn't a good friend to other people because nobody really knew what was going on. My family couldn't do much, bar my husband, who was being a single dad. He was on annual leave for the longest time possible because he couldn't physically go to work because he had to tend to me. There was no one else. So this one woman, bless her, every week she would just check in on me. And I remember she told me at the beginning of my sessions to rate how I felt out of 0 to 10. And I said 0, and it was 0 for the first few weeks. And we got to a point by end of the session when I got to a 9. And for me, that was like mind blowing. And it was over the course of, a few weeks, I think I got to the end of my second trimester when I personally felt like a bit normal. The beginning of my third trimester, I was like, is this what pregnancy is meant to feel like? That's when, we decided to end the sessions. But yeah, that's the NHS counsellor actually did help me a lot. And it wasn't just for the hyperemesis. I mean, I first time around had quite a really bad birth as well, traumatic birth. So she helped me heal a lot of issues I had within myself. And I think that's what spurred on I'd say I was depressed, my depression, the second time around with having the hyperemesis and the fear of what my birth was gonna be.
Yeah, well, Afshan, thank you for sharing that. And I think mental health for mums post-birth is such an important topic.
So important.
In fact, if anyone's listening to this episode and wants specific help with that, we have a really good episode in series 1 with a psychiatrist talking about maternal mental health and giving you some help on PTSD. So do check out that earlier episode. So Charlotte, if I could just introduce the work of your fantastic charity. For anyone who doesn't know you, could you just say what you do and what are the resources that are there on offer for mums like an Afshan out there today?
Yeah, of course. So the charity is called Pregnancy Sickness Support. We've been in operation for over 20 years now, and we support obviously women with HG, but also their families and carers. I think Afshan's described really well actually what her husband ended up becoming, which was a carer. And that is very, very common. So we have a national free phone helpline, which gets sufferers straight through to a support team. They're not medically or clinically trained, so they're not going to be able to, diagnose or prescribe any medication. You do need to go to a healthcare professional for that. But they are there to listen, to give you advice, and as you've already said, Theo, support you in how to advocate for yourself, because we've highlighted already today, that disconnect between a midwife who you would expect to know about pregnancy-related conditions, saying something like, oh, this is just normal. A&E, it sounded like in Afshan's case, weren't quite convinced until the sick bucket proved it, and then, okay, we'll listen to you. So advocating for yourself is really, really important. We have a national peer support service, which is just vital, and I think it's our biggest USP, where we connect current sufferers with previous sufferers. And it's exactly like we've talked about today. It's having someone that you can text, WhatsApp, and call and just say, I'm having a really bad day today. And whilst my partner is very, empathetic and sympathetic, they don't know what to say. They don't know what you're going through. And I think, in effect, that NHS counsellor was a very similar relationship for you, Afshan.
Yeah.
And you can have that for the entire pregnancy. It's up to you when you decide to start that and when you might want to end that. And then finally, and this is something that's really developed in the last few years because we've had to, there aren't any real HG pathways for sufferers and their mental health. It is a real postcode lottery. There's an expectation, there's like a bar of how severely traumatic the thing that you must have had to experience to be able to get perinatal mental health, and HG doesn't hit the bar. It doesn't meet healthcare professionals' expectations, which is obviously wrong and inaccurate. So we have a counselling service. I would say 80% of the people who come to us are postpartum, because it is very difficult to commit to counselling if you are feeling so sick and still being sick every week. But we do have sufferers come through who are currently pregnant, and it really is a space for them to talk through what they're going through, what they're feeling, guilt, the shame of not being able to look after their children, missing everything. I'm a rubbish this, I'm a rubbish that, which isn't true. But in that moment, in that bed, when you're isolated and you have those intrusive thoughts, and we sadly do know that around 26% of sufferers will have occasional suicidal ideations, and nearly 7% will have regular suicidal ideations because this condition is so isolating. So that's what the counselling service is for. We have fully funded sessions for those who need it. And just generally, we're here to raise awareness, train healthcare professionals, and just be that lifeline when, I know personally coming out of a doctor's appointment, bags under my eyes, I hadn't washed my hair for days, I smelt, saying this is what's happening to me and being told, yeah, you've just got really bad morning sickness. It will be gone in a couple of weeks. And that feeling of utter despair of nobody is going to listen to me. And that's why I think 50% of sufferers consider termination, because that is the only way to end that suffering up until a certain point. And sadly, 5% have to make the decision to have a termination.
Well, that is a really shocking and sobering statistic. And Afshan, I thought you illustrated that point really well in your own personal story. This is something that we need to take very seriously. And if you don't think you're getting the help you need to keep advocating for yourself to say this is extreme. And I'm very pleased to hear that you did have your second baby, but presumably this also had a huge impact on your husband and wider family. You mentioned that he had to take some time off to care for you. And I know there'll be dads and other family members listening to the show today. So could you tell them what would be some good practical help that they could provide a mum who's in a similar situation to you? Like, what can they do in that situation that's helpful?
Oh, I'm laughing because I there's so much that it all depends on the mum and how she feels, you just have to listen to her. You have to take her seriously. Like when she's saying she can't eat this or she can't eat that, she can't eat this, just saying have some water or maybe this will work, and just kind of just being there for her. Like there's nothing he could have done, honestly, Theo, that would have made me feel better. Anything, I was so angry at him for even making me pregnant, for being a part of it. He got the brunt of it all. And if you do have other children, I think as a spouse, just kind of just being there for that other child, I now back, I thank him for everything he did for my daughter, for my first. Without him, I don't think I would, I don't know where we'd be. Just taking you seriously. I mean, he was there to wipe up the sick around the house, he was there to change the sheets. He was there to help me wash my hair. I couldn't brush my teeth, Theo, for weeks. The physical element of, something like that is so small, but it's so big in our heads, and all we're doing is rotting in bed. There's nothing else. I'd say, make sure there's good TV to watch in bed and just kind of just be there for me. There's nothing I could do. And I think also another thing is first time round when I had hyperemesis, it did really mentally obviously affect me. And it also affected my thoughts in having a second child. So I know, Charlotte, me and you have spoken about this a lot. The fact that I even had a second child for us as a couple was huge because there was a chance I knew I would have it again. However, a lot of people were telling me, and I naively believed them, that I wouldn't happen again. So even that talk between husband and wife that we had to have, like I wanted a sibling for my first, and the thought of even having it again, we had to rearrange family holidays. We had to think about when we'd have this baby. It would have to be planned just in case I had hyperemesis again. And that's the things, it adjusted our life, even the thought of having another child. So yeah, stuff like that. If you've gone through it the first time round and you're thinking of having your second child, just know it can happen again, and it most probably will. And just to it's so hard for me to say be mentally and physically ready because you never are. Sorry, I couldn't give any. I'm not.
No, but I think it's really important to have these really frank, honest conversations because
Just
it
advocate
is
for
incredibly
yourself.
difficult.
Advocate and do not stop until you've got the help. And, pregnancy sickness support are there. That's something I wish I knew. And yeah, there's so much more out there now for women going through it. So hopefully with that support, mentally, we can be on our way.
And I think you both coming on the episode today to raise awareness of it is part of the point, right? Because I do think, Charlotte, that a lot of healthcare professionals, let alone the general public, don't know a huge amount this condition. And so is there a real sort of lack of awareness about the condition, would you say, in this country?
Yeah, huge. There's a huge lack of awareness. And I think, again, because this happens so early in pregnancy, we have primary care and secondary care. And, pregnancy is usually secondary care led, midwifery led. Hopefully, you don't need to see an obstetrician because your pregnancy is usual and normal. And at 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks pregnant, you are going to a GP because you don't have a midwife to call yet. And they're just not trained on this condition. So there's not, early pregnancy training for GPs that is a national rollout that they have to know everything. They just don't. And whilst the guidelines do exist, there's multiple guidelines. As I'm sure you are very aware, Theo, there are national guidelines, but then there are regional trusts who might have their own local guidelines that are supposed to interpret the national guidelines. Feeding information from the top down to the front line is incredibly difficult. And we see a lot of misinformation still that healthcare professionals are putting out there when they're seeing women with this condition. So there's a huge job around training. But I would just really add that I'm not a medical professional. I can't imagine what it's like to be a GP. But whether you've read the guidelines or not, whether you understand them or not, there's got to be a level of empathy of a person sat in front of you, like I said, who hasn't washed, who hasn't brushed their teeth. I remember with my son, literally sat in this waiting in the doctor's surgery room with my husband, and I just couldn't be bothered to talk and fight anymore. I just sat there, and my husband was really trying, and the doctor was like, "Yeah, I mean, we've given him one lot of anti-sickness medication. There really isn't any more," which isn't true. Going outside, my husband had got a parking ticket because where he parked, he wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't get out of the car. And I literally just sat there and thought, if I was ever in this position where there was a human being in front of me that I can clearly see is suffering, and I didn't have the answer, I'd blimmin' well go and find it out. And I would, call back and say, look, I can't help you right now. I'm going to call you back. And we really say to healthcare professionals, do that. Call us. We have lots of evidence-based expert information. We know the guidelines inside out. So there's a lot of work to do there, Theo, which is really sad for 2025. Personally, I think that's a disgrace. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about it. And that's why I was so pleased to do an episode on it, because actually it's amazing how many people I've personally met who've had a similar experience and they knew nothing about it before it happened to them. And could we just touch a bit more on the mental health point, Charlotte? So Afshan very bravely shared about her depression and the impact on her mental health. And she did speak to an NHS counsellor. But what are the kind of mental health support that's out there in the UK for families who are affected?
Look, the statistics are dire around mental health with HG, so you are more likely to have antenatal depression, which I don't think gets discussed quite as much as postnatal depression. So obviously that's depression during pregnancy, which people don't expect women to be experiencing. PTSD as well, more likely to have PTSD. So you really, if you're under the care of a midwife, they should be checking, they should be asking you questions about your mental health at certain touch points in your pregnancy journey. If they're not, mention it and say, please, can I be referred to a perinatal mental health specialist? Is there a talking therapies that I can be referred into? I don't want to be really negative. I feel like I'm being really negative, but it is kind of a postcode lottery as well. Like what trust you are under, what are the pathways there that are in place? If you can't get access to support, and let's be really clear here, the support has to be timely. You're only pregnant for 9 months if that pregnancy hopefully goes to full term, right? So you can't be on a waiting list for 6 months when you're 3 months pregnant, because by the time you need the support, you're in the postpartum period and you probably then fall under a different pathway. So again, pregnancy support, we're here. We've got that national counselling service. We can provide fully funded sessions for those who need it, who aren't able to pay. But yeah, you're going to have to advocate again. It's advocating for the physical side of this condition and the mental health side. Who can I talk to? Who can you put me in touch with? And just like Afshan said, just someone to check in with me and just make sure I'm okay and I'm doing okay, and just have a 20-minute chat means the world to a sufferer going through this condition.
And for anyone who's listening to this episode, do check out our show notes. We've got a lot of links in there to the charity that Charlotte represents, and some other useful resources which you might like to check out. And Afshan, I'm so sorry to hear that first you did consider not continuing with the pregnancy and it had such an impact on your mental health. Is there anything you'd like to say to mums who are thinking of reaching out to peer support or to a charity but don't quite feel they're ready to pick up the phone, that you'd like to encourage them to do so?
Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. If you need the help, pick up the phone. There's only so much medication that can, make you feel better. But actually knowing that there's other people out there that have been through the same, because there is, knowing that it will be okay. You will, I couldn't see the end of the tunnel. I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. One tip that I got given was I actually bought a baby grow that was really small, a vest, and I used to put it at the end of my room, and every time I would throw up and I wanted to give up and I couldn't do it, I would look at this tiny baby grow and think, I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it because at the end of the day, in 9 months or however many months, I'm going to have that baby in my arms. And I really, really wanted a baby, I wanted this child. It was a wanted child. So if you are in the position where you want the child but you feel like you can't carry on, please pick up the phone and ask for help. They will help you in ways that you don't even think of. They will help you in ways that your husband or your partner or your mum or your dad cannot help you with. And they have, techniques and ways to shift your mindset where you think that, you've given up on everything. But I know as a mum that had hyperemesis twice, without that help, I don't know how I would have gone on, and they really, really helped me. So if I'm that one person to tell you to pick up that phone and ask for help, there's no shame in it, there's no embarrassment in it. So many women are going through the same thing and have had the same thought as you. You're not a bad person. So please pick up the phone and ask for help, because when you do, and fingers crossed you do have that baby in your arms, it's true what they say, there's like a millisecond where you forget about everything that's happened and you have this joy, and instead you have a diva 3-year-old, a 4-year-old that I have now that's putting me in my place. And I think so many times, you know what I went through when I was pregnant with you? And you will look back at stuff like that, and pick up the phone and ask for help.
Well, that's such useful advice. And I think for anyone listening to today's episode, I hope also you're feeling a bit more hopeful that, both of my episode guests today did suffer from it, but they both went on to have really healthy babies who've now grown up, and actually it was totally worth it, and they did ask for help. And Afshan, you also mentioned that with your first baby, you had very sadly a very traumatic birth. And something I'm really keen to talk about on the podcast is just support for mums' maternal mental health. And we know that nearly 30,000 women every year are suffering from PTSD post-birth. I have to say I was one of the kind of more skeptics for therapy myself when I suffered a similar experience, but actually it really helped me, and I'm really keen that other mums get access to the support that they need. So had you spoken to a therapist before, or was it your first time, and how did you find the experience of kind of sharing your story and what had happened to you, and did that help?
It did. It was my first time. I'd never had any therapy before. It was post-birth, so it was postnatal therapy that I had. I just couldn't come to terms with how my pregnancy and birth went. Obviously I had the hyperemesis the first time round, and the birth I had a very it was a life and death situation, and I had to have a emergency C-section the first time round, and I had a briefing, I think that's the term that they call, with all the kind of people that was a part, involved in the birth. So the anesthesian, the surgeon, the midwives who were all in the room, just to figure out how it happened. I actually got sent forms to make medical negligence claim if I wanted to, but I didn't know why I'd had them forms. I was like, oh, something went wrong, but clearly they knew that something went wrong. I didn't go through with any complaint or anything like that because I thought, what's the point? I've got the baby now. It's happened. But then mentally on me, it obviously took a big impact because I couldn't even think about even having another child. I didn't want to ever be pregnant again or go through that birth. Recovery for me, pregnancy-wise, post-birth, my recovery was very, very long post C-section. And yeah, the help that I got, the therapy that I got did help me. It did help me heal a little bit. I don't think I fully got over it because when I fell pregnant the second time round, the hyperemesis coming back again, the fear, everything came back. But at the time, it made me heal enough to even consider having another baby, So again, I actually seek private therapy for that. And yeah, it helped because it doesn't necessarily have an impact on me as well. My mental health also impacted my marriage, my husband, it all kind of interlocks. So yeah, I think I needed that therapy. And again, there's no shame in that. Pregnancy, it happens if you're lucky enough. And I was very aware, that's another thing that I kept saying, I'm so lucky to even be pregnant. And that's another thing that carried me forward as well. So yeah, there's so much help out there. I didn't know at the time, and I wish I had someone like me and Charlotte and you, Theo, to tell me that there was. And yeah, I advocated for myself and I went out there, and I had a very supportive husband that would call up the therapist and say, all of this on my behalf. So yeah, I'm very glad I did it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think for anyone listening to today's episode, I think it's really important to know that there's a lot of help and resources out there with your recovery. So as Afshan said, do pick up the phone. So Charlotte, there's always 2 questions I like to ask every guest on the episode. And the first is a really practical one of a kind of resource or something that a mum or a family member should use. So what would you like to signpost families to who are affected by HG?
I've got to say that the charity, obviously, but other than what I've said, we have a lot of resources on our website. So we have fact sheets that can be downloaded, so they can be easily taken to any appointments that you might have. And just because we've spoken quite a lot about carers and partners today, we do also have a partner carer WhatsApp peer support network as well. So husbands, mums, dads. Just this morning, we've had a mum and dad come through who are inquiring about their daughter-in-law, which had just made me tear up. They were like, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. So they'll be added to a WhatsApp group and they can speak to other carers and get that kind of advice. So yeah, please head over to the website. Lots of downloads, information, and just another peer support service, which we really hope will be effective.
Great. And I'm a huge advocate of peer-to-peer networking because, as you said, both of you, having someone who's been through a similar experience to you, who can relate to what happened to you and make you feel like you're not alone, I think is so incredibly important. And Afshan, what would you like to signpost mothers to?
Pretty much the same as Charlotte, to be honest, another peer. So try and find, there's so many people out there that have, now said that they've had hyperemesis, just try and, I don't know, go to the website, go to Pregnancy Support and find someone that's been through it or talk to somebody who can help. I mean, there was someone on Instagram that everyone told me to kind of go and see their posts, and they were very open with having hyperemesis. Even just rewatching them videos to tell myself I'm not the only one, someone else has been through it, helped me so much. There's no book on it, that'll tell you how to get over it, how not to have it. But just speaking to somebody who has been through it or that can tell you, you know what, come to me, DM me and I will speak to you about it.
Well, and this is the point, right, of having a network and a shared space for mums to feel less alone. And as we're getting towards the end of the episode, I always like to put you both in the hot seat. Having been a former politician, I know that there are people in the government listening to this episode and to the podcast. So I'm really keen to continue my cross-party campaign to improve maternity care for new mums. So Charlotte, perhaps I could start with you. Is there anything that if you could talk to the Prime Minister today and tell him to improve care for mums who are suffering from this, what would you like to ask him to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the country's at a turning point at the moment in lots of different ways. And so speaking specifically about maternity, I don't know, I look in the past year, I'm only 42, so it's not like I've had years of experience of the political generations of gone by, but I remember this feeling of wanting to have like a best in class and like a world beating solution. And I always felt like the UK, Britain always seemed to want to answer that. And I feel like we have a real opportunity with maternity to do that now. We have a national health service, which is unique globally anyway. It's not like every single country has this. We need to start, and I referred to it earlier, we need to look at things like national guidelines and then look at the reality of them. They're not actually being implemented regionally because the trusts have different infrastructure. They have different demographics that they have to take care for. So I really would say, as the Prime Minister, this is an opportunity to do something best in class. Speak to lived experience people, work with the VCSE sector, which I know people would expect me to say, but there's a real misconception about people who work in charities. I have decades of experience in business and marketing. I know what I'm talking about a lot of things. I could be very beneficial in designing services development, and every other CEO I know in my network would be able to do the same. So lean on us, work with us, and let's be proud to say that our maternity services are world beating. But we've got to do something quickly. It has to be a long-term strategy, not a short-term fix. I do believe that it's something that we can achieve.
And I agree with so much of what you just said. And I remember when I chaired the birth trauma inquiry in Parliament last year, we very much found very similar issues about government services in the NHS being very fragmented and not joined up, and not having a universal service for so many things, whether it was mental health or physical health of mums post-birth. So rest assured, myself and Rosie Dufford MP and others are keeping up those arguments to the Health Secretary. And Afshan, what would you like to see the government do to help mums like you?
Yeah, exactly the same as Charlotte, to be honest. And I think as a mum who's been through it, just education. I think education and just educating GPs, midwives, medical staff, just to know a bit more about what hyperemesis is, and just to take it seriously when you have this vulnerable mum in front of you telling you that they don't want this anymore and they can't drink and they can't live. Take them seriously and just have that empathy with them, that it is not just morning sickness. And I said to Charlotte, I'm going to get a t-shirt that says it's not just morning sickness. Education, I think, is key.
And just finally on that point, did you go to antenatal classes, and was this ever mentioned in any of them?
Never. It was never mentioned in any antenatal class that I went through. And yeah, I think pregnancy has a, majority of people are very happy, during pregnancy, as they should be. But I think hyperemesis strips that from you very quickly in my experience. And I probably had the last 3 weeks of pregnancy, maybe 4 weeks, pushing it, where I could be at one with my bump and my belly, and and by that point everything's, I'm nearly about to give birth, so I'm ready for that. So yeah, no, there's nothing in antenatal classes, in any of the books, in any of the websites. There's no. So I think, yeah.
Well, I think there's a big piece of work to do on just kind of better educating mums during pregnancy, and that's partly why I set up this podcast, was to be a resource for families to find access to this information that they're probably not getting elsewhere. Well, can I thank you both so much for coming on today's episode? I learned so much about HG, and I think it was really helpful to have the description of the symptoms so anyone listening today knows what to look out for. And I hope the message came through very loud and clear to please advocate for yourselves. Please do reach out for help. Charlotte runs a fantastic charity. Please do check them out as a resource. So just remains to say thank you to both of my guests for coming on today, for breaking the taboo about extreme morning sickness. And I hope that you found this episode helpful, and it will give you access to the help and resources that you need. So if you've been enjoying this series of Breaking the Taboo, then please do rate us on Apple iTunes or Spotify, and please do share it with friends and family. And we also want to hear from you. We do read the comments from all of our listeners. Today's episode came about because of comments that you all made and sent me asking to know more about this subject. So please do get in touch with me if you have ideas for future episodes. We'd love to hear from you. So goodbye for now, and thank you for joining Breaking the Taboo, and stay tuned for next week's episode.